Well, starting out the morning with a little talk with Jesus is certainly a nice way to start the day. These 5-year-old twin boys, very cute 5-year-old twin boys, full of mischief, constantly giving their mother grief, always getting into trouble. Finally, after a lot of exasperation and a lot of frustration, she takes them to her church to be counseled by her preacher. He calls one of them in the office, sits him in a chair, looks him in the eye, and says, "Where is God? Where is God?" The little kid looks at the preacher for a few seconds, jumps out of his chair, bolts out of the office, grabs his brother by the hand and says, "Run, run. This time we're really in big trouble. God is missing and they're blaming it on us." Well, we all know God is not missing. All we have to do is look around and we can see God everywhere, especially in Highlands, North Carolina. The day is Laity Sunday. The day is a day that we recognize and show appreciation for those people in the church that give of themselves and give time and make a difference in the church. Since this church was founded, we have had 46 different preachers. We love our preachers, but it's the people in the church that make the lasting difference. The most famous layman and the most important person in the New Testament, next to Jesus Christ, of course, was the Apostle Paul. Jesus was 5 years old when Paul was born. Paul was converted at age 50, beheaded at age 65. There are 27 books in the New Testament. 14 are attributed to Paul. 155 references to grace in the New Testament. 130 come from Paul. Paul is known as the apostle to the Gentiles. John and Charles Wesley came to America in 1735. Their mission was to teach Christianity to the American Indians in the state of Georgia. The first Methodist church was built in 1784 in Baltimore, Maryland. And back in those days, the Methodists would hire laymen, known as circuit riders, to travel by horseback throughout the rural parts of the country. And their mission was to organize meetings and to establish churches. And by 1844, there were over 4,000 circuit riders traveling throughout the rural parts of America. And because of the circuit riders, the Methodists quickly became the largest Protestant denomination in America. Highlands, North Carolina, was founded in 1875. But by 1875, there were already many families and people scattered throughout the mountains of North Carolina. And because of the circuit riders, many of them were Methodists. The first organized Methodist meeting in Highlands was around 1860. They would meet at the Log Law House, which is located right across from where Fresh's Restaurant is located today. It was an ancient Cherokee Indian camping ground. And by the 1880s, there were two factions of the Methodists in Highlands. We had the Southern Methodists and we had the Northern Methodists. And the reason there was two factions because there was disagreement over the Civil War. The Southern Methodists built their first church in 1885 over on Spruce Street between 4th and 5th Street, where I think the Highlands Playhouse Lodge is located. The Northern Methodists built their first church where the Baptist Church is located today. But it wasn't long before the Northern Methodists began to realize they needed the help and the leadership of the Southern Methodists. So in 1907, they sold their church to the Baptists and merged with the Southern Methodists, and the Southern Methodists and the Northern Methodists became known as the Highland Methodists. And in 1908, the Highland Methodists started building their first church, which is located on the property where we are today. A lot of you have seen this photograph. I got it from Rand Schaffner. He's the one that wrote the book In the Heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, Highlands, North Carolina. You can see that it's a frame building located almost on the road, and the road is dirt. Now, Alan Reese had a photograph similar to this. His was larger, and his showed a large cornfield right next to the church on the left side. This was a one-room building. In the middle of the room was a big pot-bellied wood-burning stove. And because it was only one room, they didn't even have a bathroom. This was the church that was used until the early 1950s when they started their first renovation. And according to Richard Melvin, the first thing they did was put logs under the church and roll the church back to where we are located today. And then they started a new renovation. They added Sunday school rooms, a large fellowship hall, the preacher's office, a modern kitchen, front porch, chapel, and a new steeple, and most importantly, bathrooms. This is where the chapel area was, right over here. We still call it the chapel area. It was a separate room attached to the church, but it was a separate room. The chapel was paid for by Kate Tillett Smith. Kate Tillett Smith made a number of contributions to the church over her lifetime. Her father and her grandfather were very important to the Methodists. Her father taught school at Vanderbilt University, taught religion, and her grandfather was a bishop, and he was called the Iron Duke because he had such tenacity, focus, and determination to do whatever he could do to help the Methodists in the mountains of North Carolina. And there is a photograph and a bio of Kate Tillett Smith in the entrance to the chapel. There were a number of ways that the church raised money to pay for the renovation. Of course, money was raised by contributions from members as well as non-members, especially from the summer residents. And summer residents were very charitable in giving, even the ones who did not come to this church. Reverend Bob Early was the preacher back during that time, and he is the catalyst for getting the church renovation started. And there were times when he would get in his car during the winter, head to Florida, and call on summer residences to make contributions, and I understand he was very successful in doing that. And then there was rummage sales. I understand a lot of rummage sales. And there were fundraising dinners. The women in the church would have a fundraising dinner, and people who were members, people in Highlands, people who lived around the area would come to the fundraising dinner, and that was another way they raised money. And also, there was meetings in the church. The Rotary Club met every Tuesday night, and the women in the church would cook supper for the Rotary Club. And the MYF girls, if those of you who were raised in the Methodist Church might remember MYF, it was the Methodist Youth Fellowship, very popular. I was in MYF. The MYF girls would wait on tables and serve the food. And we've got some ladies in the church today that are still active that were part of that MYF group. I know Jerry Crow, I know Jenny Bryson, Carrie Speed, Lorraine Talley, and according to Jerry Crow, the Rotary Club ate very well. And before I forget it, I forgot it this morning in the first service, we are still in the original church. This is the original church. What they did was just put stonework around the church. And a number of the people were involved in the stonework, but the man who was in charge to make sure everything went right was Clark Pickleheimer's father, Mr. Lyman Picklesheimer. And then as you look around, you see the stained glass windows. Every one of these stained glass windows has a story. They were given by family and friends of the family in memory of loved ones. And I have a book here that was written in 1993, it says the stained glass windows of the Highland United Methodist Church, 1993. And every one of these windows have a story. I can't talk about all of them, but I will talk about two. The Gottwald family has two, and the first one in the church is this one right over here, the first one on my right by Mary. John and Martha Gottwald were some of the earliest leaders in the original church. They even helped hang the rafters in the church. And this one over here in the middle on the left is for Martha Norton Gottwald. She died in 1944, aged 90 years old, and I've heard from a number of people that she had almost perfect attendance, not only for Sunday school, church, but also any church meeting that was happening at the church, and that she attended church almost up to the day that she died. She must have been very, very special. Her friends and family said there was no more saintly woman in the world than Cousin Martha. And you know, one never completely dies that's left in the hearts of those that are left behind, that remain in the hearts of those that are left behind. And the pews, every one of these pews were donated by members and friends of the church. If you look on the end of each pew, there's a metal plate. There's even one metal plate over here from a Mr. Woodruff, who didn't even attend this church. So the people in Highlands were very generous to this church. And then a couple of years ago, the church celebrated their 100-year anniversary. And Jerry Crow talked about the chandeliers. I've never paid any attention to the chandeliers, but if you look up, we have 4 chandeliers. And right in the middle of service one Sunday, Reverend Bob Early just blurted out, "This church needs chandeliers. We picked out the chandeliers. They're $1,200, and we need people to volunteer to pay for the chandeliers." 4 hands went up, and each family paid $300 each. The new steeple. If you get a chance, when you go outside, check out the new steeple. The new steeple was the finishing of the metal and so forth. The new steeple was done by Mr. Barney Wilson. Mr. Barney Wilson owned a tin store. I never heard that terminology before, but that's what Richard Melvin used, a tin store, and he said that he would do things like drain pipes, gutters, occasionally a tin roof, special projects, and he had a reputation for never taking any measurements. He would just eyeball things. Always get it right. And Richard said he came over to the church, he looked at the steeple, took a few notes on a pad, went back to his shop, came back in the steeple, and it fit perfectly. And I know we can believe that story because even though Richard is an attorney, his grandfather and his father were Methodist preachers, and Herb James confirms the story. Herb says that he remembers Mr. Wilson standing around with a pad, taking a few notes, eyeballing whatever project he was going to do, and he always had a pipe in his mouth. That's his memory. And last but not least, back during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when the summer residents would come to Highlands, they would bring their help. They would bring their chauffeurs, their maids, their gardeners, their cooks, and there would be so much help, so many help in Highlands, that the Methodist Church would have a special service for them every Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And the reason Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock is because they were off in the afternoon. Sunday mornings and for lunch, they were preparing food and doing the things they had to do, but they were off on Sunday afternoon, and the Methodist Church had a special service just for the help every Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock. The help was so appreciative that at the end of the year, they would cook supper for the entire congregation, and according to Jerry, the food was delicious, and there's still some of the recipes floating around Highlands today. And in addition to that, they would also have a performance at the end of the year. They would play different musical instruments, sing hymns, southern spirituals, gospels, and they would raise money. People from all around would come hear them, and they would raise money and the money that they raised, they would give to the church and some to the hospital. One year they raised almost $1,300, and they gave right at $700 to the church and $600 to the hospital. They had their own club up on Manny Road. It's called the Highlands, North Carolina Social Club. And according to Sue Potts, every Saturday afternoon they would go to the movie. If you remember, some of you remember, we had a movie theater in Highlands back in those days. And they would go to the movie theater at 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. And she said her grandfather always attended that movie, and he always sat in the same seat. Special church with a lot of special people, a lot of special members. A number of the members in this church families go all the way back to before this church was even built. Dr. William James, famous psychologist, was born in New York City in 1841. He had a rather famous family. His brother was Henry James, who had written a number of best-selling books, probably best known for his short stories, and he also wrote 12 Broadway plays, and his sister had her diary published. And Dr. James became known as the father of American psychology, and at one time, his textbook was used by most of the colleges throughout the country. And he said that the greatest discovery of his generation was that we can change our life by changing our attitude. Same thing that Dr. Norman Vincent Peale said in his book, The Power of Positive Thinking, which became one of the best-selling books of all time. But Dr. James also said that the deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated. We all want to be appreciated. But you know, it's not only important to receive appreciation, it's important to give and show appreciation. Dr. William Sturgeon, professor of School of Theology at Boston College, sitting in his office one late afternoon reflecting on his life and the people in his life who had helped him become the person he was, people who inspired him, people who encouraged him, people who really made a difference in his life. And he was thinking particularly about his 5th grade school teacher. So he decided he would write her a letter of appreciation, and he did. Shortly thereafter, he received a reply, and the reply went like this: "My dear William, I cannot tell you how much your letter meant to me. I'm in my late 80s now. I live alone, I cook my own meals, and I'm lonely. I feel like the last leaf of autumn lingering behind. You may be interested in knowing that I taught school for 50 years, and your letter is the first letter of appreciation I ever received. It came one cold, cold morning. It cheered me as nothing has in many years." One person can make a difference, and when we make a difference, we feel good about ourselves, and we feel good about ourselves, life is better. One way to feel good about yourself is help someone feel good about themselves. You know, you can't bring sunshine into the life of others without bringing a little bit into your own life. I'm going to close with a few verses. The first one is Paul, Philippians 8:9, and he says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is pure, whatever is just, whatever is lovely, whatever has good report, if there is virtue, if it's praiseworthy, meditate on these things." And Philippians 4:4, "Rejoice in the Lord, always rejoice in the Lord." We got a phone going off somewhere. And 1 John 5:1, "He that is in us is greater than he that is in the world." You know, the day's Appreciation Day, and I thought Beth did a good job in naming this program A Place for All. And this church certainly is a place for